You're listening to What to Listen To, the podcast that answers the question you didn't even know you were asking. From fascinating deep dives to thought-provoking trends, we've got your ears covered, so sit back, plug in, and let's explore what's worth your time today.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking into something a little bit different. It's a sensitive topic that's been in the news a lot lately, and, I'm sure a lot of you might have some questions. We're going to be deep diving into the topic of incest in America and how the rise of at-home DNA testing has really, brought this issue to light more than ever before. This is a sponsored episode brought to you by PlushTrap.com. PlushTrap makes super fun accessories like bunny beanies and bunski masks. Be sure to check them out at PlushTrap.com or follow them on Instagram at PlushTrapper.
It's really amazing how these DNA kits, they were initially marketed for tracing your ancestry and finding long-lost relatives. They've really inadvertently uncovered some family secrets that some people would much rather have stayed buried.
Yeah, it's true. I think we've all probably sent in our saliva sample at some point, just kind of like excited to find out, where do my ancestors come from? Who am I related to? But imagine getting those results back and finding a close relative that you never knew existed and not exactly in the way you had hoped for.
Right. And it's a scenario that we're seeing more and more these days. In fact, there was a study published in Nature that found as many as 1 in 200 individuals who take these tests end up discovering a close relative that they were previously unaware of. And this often suggests, a hidden incestuous relationship somewhere in their family tree.
1 in 200. Wow. That's way higher than I would have imagined. It really makes you think, how many families out there are, walking around with the secrets hidden in their DNA?
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. But before we jump into the modern implications of all of this, I think it would be helpful to take a step back and look at the history of incest in America.
Okay, so rewind the clock a little bit here. Was incest actually a thing in America's past? I always thought it was more of something that you'd hear about in royal families or ancient societies.
Well, you might be surprised to learn that incestuous relationships were not uncommon in American history, particularly in isolated communities and especially in rural areas. When you think about it, there were limited social circles, people wanting to keep wealth or land within their families, and maybe just a general lack of understanding about the potential genetic risks involved. All of these things could contribute to these relationships happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's still kind of unsettling, though, to think that this was happening in America, possibly even in our own family histories.
It is unsettling for sure. And what might surprise you even more is that the legality of marrying relatives has varied dramatically across the United States. And actually, it still does to this day.
Wait, are you saying that there are places in the U.S. where it's legal to marry your cousin?
Well, all states do prohibit marriage between parents and children, and siblings, of course. But when it comes to cousins, the laws get a little bit murky. Some states, like California, allow first cousin marriages, while other states, like Texas, have very strict prohibitions. It's like this patchwork of regulations that reflects the different cultural and historical influences across the country.
That's pretty wild, honestly. I had no idea. So imagine you're one of those people who gets their DNA results back. Yeah. And you discover this unexpectedly close relative. Where do you even begin to process that kind of information?
Well, the first thing to understand is that discovering an incestuous relationship in your family history can be incredibly traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. This isn't just like a fun fact about your ancestry. This is something deeply personal that can really shake the foundation of your identity and your family relationships.
Exactly. It can lead to feelings of betrayal, confusion, anger, even shame. And it can trigger all sorts of questions like, who knew about this? Was anyone coerced into this? How does this change how I view my family and my own identity?
That's a lot to deal with. And I can only imagine how isolating it must feel to go through something like that alone.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to seek support if you find yourself in that situation.
Wow.
Therapists who specialize in trauma family secrets, genetic identity can be invaluable resources. They can really help you process all these complex emotions.
That's good advice. It's not just about uncovering the truth. It's about what you do with that truth and how you navigate all the emotional fallout.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is a journey, and it requires a lot of support and understanding along the way. But, while we're talking about all the emotional and ethical implications, we can't really forget about the scientific reasons why incest is considered taboo in the first place.
Right. There's a whole biological component to this, too. Something about genetic risks. Can you kind of break that down for me and for our listeners?
Sure. So it all comes down to recessive genes.
Yeah.
We all carry these recessive genes that if they're paired up with another copy of that same gene, it can actually lead to genetic disorders. And when we're talking about close kin relationships, the chances of both parents carrying that same recessive gene are much higher, which of course means there's a greater likelihood of their children inheriting two copies and then developing that genetic disorder.
So it's not just a social stigma then. There's a real scientific basis for understanding those risks.
Exactly. And, offspring of incestuous relationships, they face a higher risk of all kinds of conditions, things like cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease, even congenital heart defects and skeletal abnormalities. So that increased risk is a big part of why there are social and legal prohibitions against incest. I mean, it goes way back in history.
Okay, so we've got this mix of science, ethics, societal norms all playing a part here. But in today's world, it seems like taboos are being challenged more and more. Are there legal battles or movements out there that are trying to push back against that kind of traditional view of incest?
There are actually. We're seeing more and more legal challenges to incest laws, especially in cases where it involves consenting adults. Some people argue that, if two adults are in love and they want to be together, the government shouldn't be able to interfere, regardless of their blood ties.
That's definitely a controversial viewpoint. It must lead to some pretty heated debates, about individual rights versus societal norms and all that.
Yeah, for sure. These cases bring up all sorts of complicated questions. Like, what is the role of the law when it comes to personal relationships? Where do we draw the line between, protecting individuals and upholding what society thinks is right? It's a really gray area, and there aren't easy answers.
Absolutely. And thinking about all of this, how are these DNA testing companies handling this? This flood of information that can be really unexpected and really sensitive for people. Because they're playing a role whether they intend to or not. They're uncovering these secrets.
Yeah, the rise of at-home DNA testing has definitely complicated things. On one hand, it's been amazing. It's opened up a whole world of possibilities for people to connect with relatives they never knew, to learn about their ancestry. But on the other hand, like we've been saying, it's unearthing these family secrets that in some cases have been hidden for generations, and sometimes it really has devastating consequences.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure.
Sure.
It's cool to, learn about your heritage and where you come from. But what happens when that knowledge comes with a whole lot of family drama or even trauma?
It can be incredibly tough. Some people, they might embrace that opportunity to finally understand their family history, even if it is painful. But others might just feel completely overwhelmed by it all, betrayed, even ashamed by what they find out. And there's no right or wrong way to react to this kind of information. It often takes a lot of soul searching and processing.
Yeah, it must be incredibly disorienting to have your whole understanding of your family and really your own identity just completely shaken up like that. What are some of the most common reactions that you see when people discover this type of information?
It really varies a lot. You see people who are just in shock and disbelief. They question whether the DNA results can even be right. Some folks get consumed by guilt and shame, even if they themselves weren't involved in the relationship at all. And then there are people who just feel angry and betrayed, especially if they feel like the truth was kept from them on purpose.
It's a whole range of emotions, and I can imagine none of them are easy to deal with. It sounds like this kind of discovery can really send ripples through a whole family.
Oh, absolutely. It can strain relationships, expose secrets that have been kept for a long time. It can even lead to legal battles. Families suddenly have to grapple with questions about things like inheritance, custody, sometimes even criminal charges, depending on the situation.
So this isn't just a personal issue then. It can have real legal and social ramifications too. It makes you wonder if we as a society are really prepared to deal with all this, this wave of sensitive information that's coming from DNA testing.
That's a really good point, and I think it's a valid concern. We're in uncharted waters here, and it's so important that we have these open and honest conversations about the ethical and societal impacts of this technology. We need to, create resources and support systems for people and families that are going through this, and really just foster more understanding and compassion for those who have been affected by incest.
It sounds like a call for a much more nuanced and compassionate approach to a topic that has been hidden in secrecy and shame for far too long. Yeah, it definitely is a call for more awareness and understanding for sure. And speaking of understanding, we've talked a lot about the impacts on individuals and families, but what about society as a whole? How is this, this whole DNA testing revelation changing the way we think about family and relationships and even our own identities?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think we're still just starting to scratch the surface when it comes to understanding the full societal impact of all this. But one thing's for certain, these tests are making us face some really uncomfortable truths about our past, about our collective past, and really rethink our ideas about family and kinship.
It's like we're learning that family trees aren't always these, straightforward lines. They can be messy and tangled and have all these branches connecting in ways we never would have expected.
Exactly. DNA testing is showing us all these. Blended families, half-siblings, unknown relatives. It really challenges that traditional idea of what a family looks like.
Yeah, and they can be both liberating and unsettling at the same time.
Absolutely. It can help us broaden our understanding of what family means. But it also brings up some really complicated questions about things like inheritance, legal rights, cultural identity.
So it's like on a societal level, we're going through our own kind of identity crisis as we try to wrap our heads around all these new connections.
I think that's a good way to put it. And as technology keeps advancing, it's only going to get more complex. We're already seeing these much more sophisticated DNA tests that can tell us not just about our ancestry and family ties, but also things like predispositions to certain diseases, personality traits, even potential behavioral patterns.
Well, it sounds like we're stepping into this whole new world of genetic information.
Yeah.
And with it comes a whole new set of ethical and societal dilemmas. Like, how do we even make sure this information is used responsibly and ethically? How do we protect individual privacy while also, moving forward with scientific understanding?
Those are the million-dollar questions, right? And there are no easy answers. I think what's important is that we have these really thoughtful discussions about the implications of this technology and that we develop strong regulations and ethical guidelines to make sure it's used responsibly. The decisions we make today are really going to shape the future of genetic science and how it impacts our lives and our society.
It's a call to action then for all of us, right? Scientists, policymakers, everyday people, we all need to be part of this conversation to approach these advancements with curiosity, but also with caution. Yeah. To make sure we're using this knowledge for good and that we're minimizing any potential risks.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Knowledge is power, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. We have to use this new knowledge wisely, with empathy and with a real commitment to protecting individual well-being and, keeping society in a good place.
This has been an incredible deep dive into a topic that's both deeply personal and affects all of society. We've covered a lot of ground today: the history, the science, the ethical questions, the emotional side of incest in America. And, while there aren't any easy answers or quick fixes here, I think one thing's clear: this conversation is absolutely essential, and it's really just getting started.
I completely agree. The more we understand about our past, our genetics, and how families are changing, the better prepared we'll be to handle the challenges and opportunities that come our way.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope this deep dive has made you think about things in new ways, broadened your perspectives, and maybe even challenged some of your assumptions. So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.
Until next time, don't just hear the world, listen to it.